I consider this segment to be this panel and the next presentation, things to keep you awake at night, because we have Rob Jackson, who is a professor of Earth Science Systems at the School of Sustainability here at Stanford, to talk about climate change and how we think about planning for our longer lives. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the organizers too for another terrific longevity conference. As Ken mentioned, I'm Rob Jackson and I study climate and the environment for a living. And I guess I want us to think about a few other things. It's important what our retirement funds are. Poverty kills people. But if we want to live longer and healthier lives, it's also important that we think about what we breathe, not just when we're 70, but when we're 17 and 7, and what our kids are breathing today. And that's the message that I want to leave you with today. I'll talk a bit about the direct effects of climate change, but I want to hone in on the benefits of clean energy first and foremost. I chair an international group called the Global Carbon Project. We track emissions of different greenhouse gases. This is the latest tally for carbon dioxide. If greenhouse gas pollution is a fire hydrant, the fire hydrant is wide open and your basement's flooding. And we haven't yet to crank it down even a titch. So greenhouse gases are still going up despite the decreases in the United States and Europe. You have people in other countries that need more energy, not less. So we have not even turned the corner to start to see greenhouse gas emissions go down yet. That's true for, I just lost my monitor. That's true for every fossil fuel out there, coal, natural gas, and oil. You're starting to see some hints of them flattening out, but for no fossil fuel do we see evidence of a decrease yet. Okay, so let's talk about the direct effects of climate change and something that's hard to plan for. If many of you were alive in the 80s, and if you have a sense that the weather is a little bit wacky right now, you are absolutely right. And that's not a random thought. There are hard data to show this. So if you go back to the 1980s, there were on average $3 billion disasters a year. And those disasters cost us on average about $20 billion in the United States. Now, there are 20 a year, and they cost us $150 billion a year. So the weather really is wacky, and the data are quite clear about it. This year, through October, we've already had 24. That's the most ever. So we'll shatter the record again this year. And it's going to get stronger and worse as climate change intensifies and temperatures go up. So these disasters are costing us money today, and they're killing people. But I would argue that the thing we really need to be worrying about isn't just climate change, it's the greenhouse gases and their pollution that drive climate change. And just some statistics, these are a couple of op-eds, one of which I wrote about, to think about climate change, not just from the environmental standpoint, but because it saves lives. Clean energy make us healthier. They promote job creation and national security. So a few stats. Globally, 1 in 5 deaths is attributable to fossil fuel pollution around the world. So that's 8 million people a year who die unnecessarily. And I would ask, why do we put up with that? Why do we allow that to continue? Here in the US, about 5 to 10% of deaths are attributable to particulate matter and ozone pollution as a direct consequence of burning fossil fuels in our lives. And there's still over 100,000 Americans that die every year from coal and car pollution. That's more Americans than die from being murdered, traffic accidents, and drowning combined. So these are major forces and causes of mortality in our lives. And they're unnecessary because clean solutions are available. And I should also add that they affect people in poorer communities and people of color disproportionately. So the richer you are, the less pollution you breathe. But even those of us in this room are breathing levels of pollution that harm us. One example of this is asthma. I think, as you all know, asthma is driven in many cases by NOx pollution. And that NOx pollution comes from our vehicles and increasingly some of the appliances in our homes, which is what I'll turn to next. So I'm going to knock on your door and go sample your indoor air quality. You just let me into your house, which is a bad idea. So here we go. So I've entered your equipment, your kitchen with our analysis equipment. So a few years ago, we started thinking about what burning fossil fuels inside our homes might do to us. You would never stand over the tailpipe of your car breathing the pollution, and yet we stand over our stoves breathing pollution day after day after day, and we accept that. So we've worked on stoves, furnaces, hot water heaters. This was work that came out of last year, documenting greenhouse gas leakage for methane, but high levels of NOx pollution indoors, NO2 that causes asthma. And this really isn't new. We've known this for about 40 years. But the thing that we measured last year that no one had done before was the creation of benzene in the open flames from our stoves. And that was made possible by new instruments that we could lug into homes and samples we didn't have to take in a laboratory. So when we started looking at benzene, my monitor, I can't see the slides, my monitor keeps going out. All right, so as I've already mentioned, stoves are the only fossil fuel appliance that we burn without a flue or a chimney. 70% of households in California have gas stoves. That's the highest percentage in the country. And then many decades of work have shown that the NOx gases stoves emit harm our health. So the guiding question of this work I'll just spend a couple minutes on is, are we releasing benzene into our homes in the same way that refineries and flares release benzene when they burn open flames at high temperature? And the answer is yes, we are. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. So here are on the right are propane stoves and gas stoves, and that's an emission rate, not a concentration, so it's an amount per time. Then the two small bars on the left are different electric options. Coil produces a little bit. That's probably because the coils are dirty, and oils and food on a hot coil can emit some pollution. Induction stoves, the preferred alternative, emit none of this pollution whatsoever. So there are safer alternatives available. Why should you care about benzene exposure? Well, benzene is one of the most potent leucogens that we know of, and there's no safe threshold for benzene concentration. So it's not that it has to get above some level to harm us. Any additional benzene harms us, at least according to groups like the World Health Organization. So what are the concentrations that we're seeing, and how do they compare to levels that societies, countries, and states like California tell us are dangerous? Well, here are the last graph I'll show you. So benzene is high in our kitchens, and it travels throughout our homes. So you would expect it to be high when you're standing right over the stove, but you might not expect it to be above thresholds in the farthest bedroom down the hall where your kids are sleeping. And that's exactly what we find. So here are 6 homes that we sampled for sort of long 8-hour time courses. In one of these homes at the top, you see the burner goes on to the left of this figure in white. It goes off when it's dark. Within an hour, the benzene levels have gone up in this bedroom down the hall. It's not so surprising. You've got a stove, you've got this hot plume of air, and it disperses throughout the house. And yes, ventilation matters, and the windows and such, but it doesn't solve the problem. So in this top house, we saw benzene concentrations that were above what California sets as the acute 1-hour threshold level. So California never wants you to be breathing benzene above that concentration for an hour. Yet here we are finding it in homes, and you have to think about that day after day after day that we're cooking in these homes, hundreds of days a year. In other homes, they're above the acute, the 1 hour, which is the other dark line there. And even down at the bottom in the stoves, the benzene concentrations always go up in the homes that we measure. But even when they only go up a little bit, they're in line with thresholds set for countries like France and Israel. And they're comparable to what you breathe in secondhand smoke, which is about 0.6 or 0.8 parts per billion benzene. So you can, that's those flat traces at the bottom there. That's comparable to standing next to somebody and breathing secondhand smoke. So those concentrations that we've measured are levels that have triggered news stories and alerts when people have found them outdoors. All right, so there are a couple of examples here. One in Greeley, Colorado from a couple of years ago. They measured 10 parts per billion at a school. That finding ended up having news coverage and investigations to figure out where this benzene was coming from and that it was dangerous. Same thing happened in Torrance a couple of years ago down in California, another school, close to 10 ppb at the upper end of levels that we find. So these concentrations, when they occur outdoors, end up with public outcry, but there's no indoor regulation of air quality. And I'm not suggesting that there should be indoor regulation, but we don't think about what we're breathing indoors as much as we think about outdoors. So there are roughly 200 people in this room. 70% Californians have a gas stove. That's maybe 150 of you have a gas stove. If you do, get rid of it this weekend. And some of you can't. Some of you may not financially be able to do that. Some of you may rent. We work with a lot of with some environmental justice group in the Central Valley. We just got back sampling public housing in Harlem. And there are many people want to be able to have safer indoor air quality, don't have the means to do it, rent their apartments or residences, can't do it. So those folks are going to need incentives and help that most of us in this room might not. Okay, this is supposed to be a symposium about big ideas, so I don't know why I'm talking about stoves, but so my big idea, what I would like to think about and what's driving or motivating my work lately is the idea that we should view the atmosphere the same way we view an endangered species or a wetland, a habitat to be restored. So the Endangered Species Act in the United States doesn't just require us to keep species alive, it requires us to restore them to health, to put them back to the way they used to be. So when we see peregrine falcons or bald eagles rising on updrafts, or when we see gray whales migrating up and down the coast of California every year, we see them because the Endangered Species Act and restoration was the goal. So my belief, my hope, really a dream for the atmosphere is that that's what should motivate us for the air, that we should be looking at putting the atmosphere back to the way it was before the Industrial Revolution. That's possible in the lifetime of people in this room for one greenhouse gas only, the super potent greenhouse gas methane. And that's the reason that methane dominates my climate change work in the group. But we can assist the recovery and view the atmosphere just the same way we view a wetland, an endangered species, and I think we should do that. I have a book coming out next year to sort of outline these ideas, and I hope you read it. It's almost lunchtime. Thank you so much for your time, and there are time for questions. There is time for questions.
We have a question from the online audience. Thank you. If we can't swap out from a gas stove, what else can we do? How much would it help to have something like a freestanding air purifier running next to it?
Okay, yeah, great question. I mentioned ventilation helps. A couple of things you can do most of all, if you can't get rid of your gas stove, you can open a window, but there are only certain times of the year we do that. We don't open our windows when it's really cold or really hot outside. You can turn on the vent hood. You can check what kind of vent hood you have. Many vent hoods, even in newer homes, don't send pollution to the outdoors. They simply recirculate the air back into the kitchen, and they pull some grease out of that air. Those vent hoods don't do anything to reduce pollution of benzene and NOx gases like I've been talking about. So if you have a vent hood, use it, but try and have one that sends the pollution outdoors. And you can check that by whether you have a flue that goes up and out, takes air pollution out. So ventilation is important, but we also test the efficacy of hoods. And in real homes, in real situations, particularly in lower income neighborhoods, they don't help as much as they should or ideally would. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was fascinating. I take your point about benzene and gas in houses or living spaces and trying to get rid of it. But I wonder if you have any comments on kind of the bigger question as we go to more electrification of not only appliances, but more of the tools we use to live, including cars. What are the implications for pollution generated by the sources of that power in areas where we can't just rely on hydro, for example, or renewables?
Yeah, so we do need a diverse energy system. What we need is a clean energy system, and everyone's definition of clean energy is a little bit different. So some people don't want to talk about nuclear. Some people don't want to talk about natural gas with carbon capture and storage or geothermal or other things. I guess I'm a generalist in terms of energy technologies. I think we need, at this point, I'll take anything I can get that's not coal, oil, and natural gas directly, to be perfectly honest. So we want to promote clean energy. California in particular has progressive laws that the state mandates carbon-free electricity in the retail sector by 2045. That's a law. We have incentives in place to phase in electric cars. So if you don't have an electric car and you're interested in buying one, you don't have to buy it just because of of helping with climate change. You can buy it because it'll make the air quality in your neighborhood and in your city better. And that's sort of the link that I hope to keep making in my climate change work, is that these energy solutions will make us healthier and help us live longer.
Hi, Cindy Hearn, Finance of America Reverse. I'm curious why the significant weather events appeared to be east of the Mississippi versus west.
Great question. And I just pulled up the newest data for 2023 last night. If you looked at the map last year, I'm sorry, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, keeps this website. It's a great website. If you just Google, don't do it now, NOAA and billion-dollar disasters, it takes you right to the site, and they have annual maps of these. And if you looked last year or 2 years ago, whenever it was, there were bunches of fires in the Western United States. We had a relatively modest fire year in the US. Canada, as you know, had an amazing record fire year. Canada burned 3 times more forest area than they've ever burned before. More area total than they've ever burned before. So that's why there was all that smoke in New York and all the way from Ottawa down to Miami. So the answer to your question is it's just a random year. And if you looked last year or a couple of years ago, there would be a lot in the western half of the US. Oh, sorry.
Love your data. Thank you so much. I have a question though. There is, are we in a catch-22? I read recently that if we're cleaning up our air, paradoxically, we're removing a protective blanket, the bad particulate matter, actually, and speeding up climate change, accelerating global warming a bit. What is your response to that? I mean, obviously, it's a huge problem that we have to address.
Really insightful question. I mean, my response is that that's correct, because when we burn things like coal in particular is coal is a 19th century fuel, right? We should be doing everything we can to be getting rid of coal as a source of electricity and heat. As we burn coal in particular, it doesn't just release carbon dioxide, it releases particulates and can create aerosols. Those aerosols and particulates block sunlight. So that as we clean up our air, yes, in fact, we're removing particles from the atmosphere that reflect a bit of sunlight. But that's just what comes with reducing the fossil fuels. And if we view greenhouse gas pollution as the first order effect, which it is, then we just have to accept that, in my view, as a consequence of reducing reducing the emissions. It just makes our job a little bit harder, to be perfectly honest.
Thanks. You spoke about us going home and replacing our own stoves. Beyond the individualist sort of personal approach, what's the political public policy angle that isn't come and take our stoves? Because that was sort of the response online when I saw some of this research going around.
To respectfully disagree, I didn't say come and take our stoves, but that's what you hear. That's what you hear about. So there are 100 cities and counties in California that have passed REACH codes. Not one of those REACH codes says we're going to come and take your stove. What they say is that at some point in the future, we will no longer sell or allow fossil fuel appliances to be put into these homes. We will require electric. That's very, very different. So you allow the appliances to end their lifetime. You allow homeowners to use them over their full lifetime. But yes, it's more than just what we can do individually. We can't decarbonize the power sector individually. We can't fix climate change without either a price on greenhouse gas pollution that's at the state level or nationally, which isn't likely in the US today, or without some policy mandates that require cleaning up that pollution. So it isn't enough. There are a lot of important things we can do individually, but swapping out your stove will help. Voting will help even more, as long as you vote like me. So, any other questions? It's almost lunchtime.
Hi, I'm Esme Fairbairn from BlackRock. I have a question about the way we've all kind of had to reframe how we think about climate change. And obviously it's this quite, well, extremely disastrous thing that's kind of looming over all our lives. And in your field, you've kind of had to figure out a way to make people pay attention to something that maybe once was more in the long term, today perhaps isn't so far off. And I'm wondering if you could share maybe strategies around getting people's attention and how we can kind of think about it in terms of, you know, the conversations we're having today and yesterday around living longer, how we're financing it. For a lot of people, retirement might seem far off, or they might not want to think about how close it actually is. So curious if you see a link between the two there.
Yeah, I do. I guess purely the fear of climate change is not motivating enough of us in the US and around the world to fix the problem. Maybe that's partly because scientists like me are not, we're not the greatest communicators in the world, but they're also entrenched interests to keep the status quo alive. In terms of motivation, that's why I talk about not just fixing the climate problem. I talk about energy security, personal health, job creation. Those are things that normal people relate to more than what used to be a distant threat that is now here. If you look at data like the weather disasters, it's not something for our grandkids. This is now. And then I view climate change a bit like a retirement plan or maintenance on your house. If you put off maintenance on your house, you can get away with it for a long time. But there comes a day when the price will be higher than what you would have paid had you taken care of and done the maintenance on that house all the way along. And Swiss Re, for an example, one of the biggest insurance companies in the world, just put out a report estimating that climate inaction will cost us $20 trillion a year by 2050. So that's 20% or so of global GDP. That's not a liberal think tank. That's an insurance company. Thank you so much for your attention.